Long before symbols were painted on cave walls or tools shaped with precision, ancestors of the human lineage walked through shifting African landscapes without any idea that a silent turning point had already taken place inside their cells. Somewhere within a small population of early hominins, a copying mistake occurred during the duplication of a gene. Nothing about it seemed remarkable. It did not create an instant leap in intelligence or a sudden change in appearance. No one could have sensed that a tiny fragment of altered DNA had begun writing a different future for an entire species. Generations passed before its effects would surface, but the seed of transformation had already been planted. But before we jump back in, drop a comment letting us know what time you're tuning in and where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our episodes are reaching. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing exciting topics here on the Primal Roots channel. The world those early hominins inhabited was unpredictable. Periods of drought, bursts of rainfall, and sudden temperature swings created constant pressure on every species sharing the terrain. Predator and prey lived under the same brutal rules: adapt or disappear. Most genetic mutations offered no benefits at all. Many faded out as quickly as they emerged, but this particular duplication survived. It lingered, carried by individuals who had no idea they were passing along a biological tool that would eventually reshape the architecture of the human brain. As millennia drifted by, descendants of those first carriers began to show subtle differences during early development. The region of the brain responsible for higher cognitive processes, the neocortex, grew slightly faster in embryos that inherited the mutation. Inside the developing brain, neural stem cells divided more often, producing a greater pool of neurons capable of forming new pathways. The change was invisible externally, yet each birth carried a blueprint with expanded potential. No single generation noticed dramatic shifts, but the accumulative effect began shaping minds capable of storing more information, coordinating movements with greater precision, and adapting to new environments with unexpected flexibility. Life in Africa demanded every advantage. Constant climate shifts forced early humans to travel long distances in search of water, shelter, and food. Groups that could remember routes, notice patterns, or cooperate effectively had a better chance of surviving hardships. The mutation integrated seamlessly into this environment. Those who inherited the expanded neocortex were more capable of solving challenges that required planning and coordination. These early differences in cognition didn't create complex culture, but they increased survival odds in ways that mattered deeply over long spans of time. The mutation's influence continued spreading through populations long before the first stone tools evolved into more sophisticated designs. When early forms of Homo began crafting implements with sharper edges and more deliberate techniques, the underlying biological advantage was already there, quietly building the scaffolding for even greater complexity. Coordination between individuals improved, sharing food became more structured, and groups learned to rely on collective strategies that extended beyond basic instincts. The brain was not yet bursting with creativity, but its circuitry was becoming capable of storing and processing more intricate patterns. Environmental pressures intensified through repeated cycles of warming and cooling. Forests receded, grasslands stretched across vast regions, and new predators appeared. These shifts made life challenging even for the most adaptable species. Yet, the mutation provided an evolutionary edge. It wasn't about being smarter in any modern sense. It was about being able to read situations with slightly more nuance, to predict danger, or to improvise when familiar resources vanished. Over time, individuals with this mutation tended to leave more descendants, allowing the altered gene to become embedded in populations that spread across enormous distances. By the time Homo heidelbergensis emerged, nearly 1 million years after the mutation first appeared, its impact was firmly rooted across diverse human groups. Fossil skulls from this era show steadily increasing cranial capacity, indicating that the swelling neocortex was no longer a subtle difference but a defining trait. These hominins navigated complex environments, hunted larger animals, and built temporary shelters using coordinated effort. Their survival strategies hint at minds capable of sustained focus, long-term memory, and cooperation that surpassed previous species. Even so, none of these early humans understood the biological mechanism shaping their abilities. The gene kept acting in silence, nudging brain development further with every generation. When Neanderthals branched from the same ancestral line, they carried the mutation with them. They adapted to freezing climates, developed specialized tools, controlled fire skillfully, and survived landscapes that would have crushed many other mammals. The mutation's influence did not grant superiority to one branch over another. Instead, it served as a shared biological foundation for resilience across multiple human species. As time advanced toward the emergence of Homo sapiens, the mutation reached its full potential. The expanding neocortex created a foundation for connections between brain regions that had never interacted so efficiently before. This network allowed new forms of creativity, social bonding, and symbolic expression to flourish. The mutation alone did not create language, but it generated the neural space that language would later fill. It did not invent imagination, but it provided the internal architecture capable of hosting ideas that extended beyond immediate experience. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this once random duplication became the silent architect of human possibility. Modern scientists uncovered the existence of this mutation only recently, using genetic sequencing and comparisons between human DNA and that of chimpanzees, gorillas, and other close relatives. When they discovered that the gene existed only in humans and Neanderthals, but not in any living primate species, its significance became impossible to ignore. Further experiments using brain organoids, miniature brain-like structures grown from stem cells, showed exactly what the mutation did. It triggered a dramatic increase in the cells that build the neocortex. The mutated gene acted like a developmental accelerator, reshaping the brain from the inside out. These findings revealed something unexpected. The human brain's expansion might not have required countless small steps across millions of years. Instead, a single genetic event, a partial duplication, could have set the stage for the cognitive explosion that eventually led to art, technology, culture, and everything that defines modern humanity. What began as an accidental copy error became the foundation for memory, invention, symbolic communication, and long-term planning. It established the biological platform that allowed future generations to innovate, create, and imagine in ways no other species on Earth ever achieved. The mutation marked the moment when evolution opened a door that had never existed before, and humanity stepped through without knowing how far that path would lead. This is just the beginning of the story. The next chapter explores how scientists uncovered the mystery behind this gene, how it functions inside the brain, and why it became one of the most important evolutionary turning points ever discovered. The search for the origins of human intelligence once depended entirely on fossils, stone tools, and scattered traces of ancient behavior. For decades, researchers believed these fragments were the only windows into our evolutionary past. Bones documented physical changes, tools revealed technological progress, and cave art hinted at symbolic thought. But none of these artifacts carried direct evidence of how the human brain became so different from that of other primates. The true engine behind our cognitive expansion, the biological mechanism that allowed the neocortex to grow beyond ancestral limits, remained invisible. That changed only when science gained the ability to read the genome like a historical record written molecule by molecule. At the start of the 21st century, advances in DNA sequencing transformed human evolution studies. For the first time, scientists could compare our genetic code to the genomes of chimpanzees, gorillas, and other close relatives. The initial goal was simple: identify small differences accumulated over millions of years. But as researchers explored these genetic landscapes, they found something that defied expectations. Among the many mutations scattered across the genome, one particular alteration stood out because it appeared in humans and Neanderthals but was completely missing in all other primates. Its uniqueness immediately raised questions about when it emerged, what it did, and why natural selection preserved it with such precision. This mysterious gene was named rGAP11B, and it didn't originate from a brand new sequence. Instead, it formed when an older gene was partially copied. During this duplication, a segment was cut short, producing an altered version with entirely new properties. Many such duplications result in broken, non-functional fragments. But rGAP11B wasn't silent. It produced a protein with activity distinct from the original gene. The appearance of this functional mutation marked the beginning of a slow but monumental shift in how the developing brain built itself. To confirm its ancient origin, researchers turned to an unexpected source: fragments of DNA extracted from Neanderthal and Denisovan fossils. These sequences, preserved inside bones buried for tens of thousands of years, revealed that both groups carried the same gene. Because chimpanzees and bonobos lacked it, the mutation had to have appeared after human ancestors split from other primates, but before the divergence of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. This placed its origin somewhere between 800,000 and 1.5 million years ago, precisely during the period when fossil skulls began showing significant increases in cranial capacity. Genetics alone, however, could not answer the most important question: what exactly did rHGAP11B do? To understand its effect, scientists created experimental models using human stem cells. These cells can transform into various tissues, including neural tissue. When the mutated gene was activated in cell cultures, the results were immediate and striking. Neural progenitor cells multiplied more rapidly, producing a thicker layer of tissue destined to become the neocortex. This suggested that the mutation didn't merely tweak brain development, it accelerated the production of the very cells responsible for higher cognition. Researchers went further, introducing the gene into embryos of animals that naturally lack complex cortical folding. The outcome startled the scientific community. The animals developed enlarged cerebral structures with early signs of ridges and grooves, patterns reminiscent of human cortical folds. These formations weren't perfect replicas of a human brain, but they demonstrated that the mutation could alter growth processes at a fundamental level. In other words, rGAP11B didn't just influence brain size, it shaped the organizational blueprint from which advanced cognition could eventually emerge. This discovery reshaped our understanding of human evolution. For years, the dominant theory suggested that our large brain resulted from countless tiny changes accumulated slowly. While many genetic shifts certainly contributed, rGAP11B showed that a single mutation can have an outsized effect. One duplication event, one incomplete copy, one accident in the machinery of cellular reproduction. This was enough to set the stage for a new kind of mind. Yet the story wasn't simply about brain expansion. It was about how that expansion created room for networks of neurons capable of forming more sophisticated circuits. As scientists continued analyzing genetic differences, they uncovered additional mutations that likely worked alongside rHGAP11B. srGAP2C, for example, slows the rate at which neurons mature, extending the period in which their connections can form and reorganize. NUTH2NL influences the proliferation of neural stem cells, adding to the cortical growth initiated by the earlier mutation. The emerging picture showed that human brains didn't evolve due to one isolated genetic event. Instead, a sequence of rare changes aligned over hundreds of thousands of years, each building on the previous one, like pieces of a biological puzzle. Although these findings offered unprecedented insight, they also raised new questions. If Neanderthals shared the same mutations, why didn't they experience the same cultural explosion seen in Homo sapiens? Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals produced advanced tools, controlled fire, and adapted to harsh environments for over 300,000 years. They were intelligent, resourceful survivors, yet their behavior did not diversify as rapidly as that of modern humans. This suggests that the genetic blueprint for expanded cognition was necessary, but not sufficient. Environmental changes, population density, cultural transmission, and social dynamics likely shaped how each species used its biological potential. With each new discovery, scientists realized that evolution is not a straight path toward complexity. Many species carry mutations that never express themselves fully because the ecological conditions aren't right. A gene can remain dormant, harmless, or even useless until a sudden change in climate or behavior makes it advantageous. In the case of ARGAP11B, the gene sat quietly for thousands of years before the pressures of shifting African environments favored individuals who could plan better, cooperate more efficiently, or interpret subtle cues in the landscape. The mutation's value emerged gradually, as circumstances demanded more advanced cognitive responses. Today's researchers continue to investigate how this gene and others like it influenced behavior. They study ancient genomes, compare brain organoids, and use advanced imaging techniques to track developmental differences. Each discovery deepens the sense that the human brain is not the product of a clear, linear progression, but the result of accidents that happen to align at precisely the right time. Some scientists propose that these mutations represent evolutionary shortcuts, allowing rapid changes that would otherwise require millions of years. Others caution that human cognition is too complex to attribute to any single factor. Regardless of the interpretation, what stands out is the sheer improbability of it all. A random genetic slip, something that could have easily vanished, became the foundation for memory, creativity, technology, and culture. A tiny change in a molecule altered the trajectory of an entire species, opening the door to languages, cities, mathematics, and the ability to question our own origins. Understanding this gene doesn't close the book on human evolution. It opens a far more intriguing chapter. The next step is to explore how this mutation shaped behavior, survival, and the rise of capacities that set humans apart from every other living creature. The clues lie not only in DNA, but in the archaeological traces our ancestors left behind: tools, shelters, patterns of movement, and signs of social cooperation that reveal how a rewired brain began to change the world. The story now shifts from molecular origins to the behavioral transformation that followed. The next chapter unpacks how expanded neural architecture influenced the way early humans interacted with each other, hunted, learned, and built the first foundations of culture. As the mutation continued its quiet journey through early human populations, the changes it triggered inside the developing brain began to influence behavior in ways that would eventually reshape the course of prehistory. These shifts did not appear suddenly. No early hominin woke up one morning with new cognitive powers or revolutionary instincts. Instead, the transformation unfolded slowly, generation after generation, as the expanding neocortex created space for increasingly flexible networks of neurons. What emerged from this long biological process was not yet the modern human mind, but the earliest hints of a new kind of intelligence, one that could observe more closely, plan more thoroughly, and respond to challenges with greater creativity than any ancestor before. Millions of years of evolution had already molded hominins into resilient survivors, but the world they inhabited was becoming more unpredictable. Climate cycles shifted rapidly, ecosystems changed shape, and familiar environments sometimes vanished in a single generation. In this unstable world, the advantages provided by the expanding neocortex became more visible. Individuals with slightly improved memory or sharper pattern recognition could track animal migrations more effectively, notice seasonal changes earlier, or remember distant water sources reached only during droughts. Small cognitive edges accumulated into meaningful differences in survival. These early differences are reflected in the archaeological record, particularly in the behaviors of Homo erectus, one of the first species to display consistent technological progression. Their hand axes, crafted with increasing symmetry and precision, reveal minds capable of mentally visualizing a finished tool before shaping it from stone. Producing these implements required more than brute strength. It demanded foresight, coordination between both hands, and an understanding of how specific angles and forces transformed raw material into a functional object. The mutation did not directly teach these skills, but it provided a brain structure capable of learning and refining them. Cooperation also began to take on new dimensions. Evidence suggests that early humans started hunting larger prey, not through random attacks but with coordinated strategies. Tracking herds required communication, shared responsibility, and trust within groups. Successful hunts depended on dividing roles. Some individuals flushed animals toward narrow spaces while others waited to ambush. This level of collaboration hints at early forms of social cognition, where individuals recognize the benefits of acting as a team rather than competing for every resource. The expanding brain was slowly turning isolated survivors into interdependent thinkers. The fossil record offers additional clues about this shift. Remains of hominins with severe injuries that healed over time show that communities provided care to members who could no longer hunt or gather. Individuals who lost teeth or suffered broken bones continued living for years, surviving only because others shared food and protection. This type of sustained support is rare among mammals and suggests that early humans were developing a sense of group responsibility. The same enlarged brain regions that allowed better planning also supported empathy and long-term social bonds. As the mutation spread into populations that would eventually give rise to Homo heidelbergensis, the cognitive gap between these hominins and their ancestors widened further. The increased brain capacity expanded the range of behaviors that could be learned and transmitted. These groups built shelters using wood, stone, and animal hides, creating stable living spaces that offered protection from harsh weather. Their tools became more specialized, different shapes for cutting, scraping, piercing, and butchering, indicating an ability to adapt methods to specific tasks. This level of problem-solving suggested minds capable of evaluating challenges and designing solutions rather than relying solely on instinct. At the same time, the growing brain allowed for more complex emotional and social dynamics. Larger groups could stay organized without constant conflict, suggesting that communication systems, although not yet spoken language as we know it, were becoming more elaborate. Gestures, vocalizations, and facial expressions were likely used with greater precision, enabling groups to coordinate movement and signal danger. The mutation's impact on neural architecture laid the groundwork for the communication systems that would eventually evolve into structured languages. The emergence of Neanderthals further demonstrates how the expanding neocortex shaped behavior. These hominins constructed tools with remarkable craftsmanship, adapted to freezing climates, and controlled fire with a level of expertise unmatched by earlier species. They built hearths, cooked food, and relied on fire to maintain warmth during long Ice Age winters. Their ability to survive in such harsh environments required planning, resource management, and group coordination, traits supported by expanded neural circuits. Neanderthals also used pigments and ornaments, suggesting an early inclination toward symbolic behavior, even if it never reached the diversity seen in Homo sapiens. Although Neanderthals inherited the same mutation, their populations were smaller and more isolated across the vast landscapes of Ice Age Eurasia. This isolation likely limited the spread of new ideas and slowed cultural innovation. The mutation gave them the cognitive capacity for advanced behavior, but environmental constraints shaped how that capacity developed. Their story shows that biology provides potential, but culture and group size determine how far that potential can expand. As Homo sapiens emerged in Africa, their populations grew larger and more connected than those of their cousins. The expanded neocortex now supported not only survival strategies, but the beginnings of creativity and symbolic thought. Early evidence of beadwork, pigment use, and carved objects suggests minds capable of imagination and identity. Communities began marking their bodies, recording ideas through symbols and establishing rituals that strengthened group cohesion. These behaviors required abstract thinking, associating meaning with shapes, colors, and objects, and social learning that allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations. Language likely flourished during this period. The biological infrastructure was already in place, but social conditions provided the spark. Larger groups needed more efficient ways to communicate, and the expanding neocortex offered the neural flexibility to support complex grammar and shared vocabulary. Communication became a tool for teaching, planning hunts, negotiating alliances and preserving information far beyond the lifespan of any individual. This transition from instinct-driven survival to culturally transmitted knowledge fundamentally changed the direction of human evolution. The mutation that began as a random genetic slip had now become ingrained in the behavior and identity of Homo sapiens. It did not guarantee progress, but it made progress possible. It allowed early humans to understand their environment with new clarity, cooperate on unprecedented scales, and develop traditions that stretched across generations. The future of humanity would be built not only on biological evolution, but also on cultural innovation, fueled by a brain capable of adapting quickly to new challenges. What began as a subtle biological change was now driving a profound behavioral transformation. The next chapter explores how scientists trace these changes across time, piecing together evidence of ancient minds through fossils, artifacts, and the genetic clues hidden in every cell of the human body. Understanding how the human mind evolved requires more than digging up fossils or cataloging stone tools. Bones reveal shape and size, artifacts display ingenuity, and ancient shelters tell stories of adaptation. But none of these alone can fully explain how cognition expanded across hundreds of thousands of years. To uncover that story, scientists had to weave together evidence from archaeology, genetics, climatology, and experimental biology. Each field offered a different piece of the puzzle, and when combined, they began to reveal how a single genetic shift interacted with environment, behavior, and culture to mold a new kind of brain. The earliest clues came from fossil skulls scattered across Africa, the Middle East, and Eurasia. Even before DNA sequencing existed, researchers noticed a striking trend. Brain volume increased dramatically over time, especially during the emergence of species like Homo heidelbergensis and later Homo sapiens. The rounded skulls, thicker cranial vaults, and expanded frontal regions hinted at internal changes that standard evolution alone could not fully explain. These fossils pointed to a long-term pattern, but the fossils themselves remained silent about the mechanisms behind those transformations. It wasn't until scientists began lining up skull measurements with ancient climate data that patterns started to emerge. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica revealed cycles of warming and cooling, showing how shifting climates reshaped ecosystems and challenged every living species. When environmental pressures intensified, hominin behavior shifted with it. Fossil sites showed sudden changes in diet, migration, and tool use, signs of minds learning to adjust to unpredictable worlds. Climate didn't merely influence where humans lived, it shaped how they thought, planned, and organized their lives. Archaeology added its own set of clues. Layers of soil preserved evidence of shelters built with increasing complexity. Early humans constructed wooden frames covered with hides, arranged stones to create windbreaks, and selected strategic positions near rivers or natural resources. These decisions reflected an understanding of environment that required memory, foresight, and cooperation. Fire pits appeared more frequently, with charred bones indicating controlled cooking rather than accidental burning. The consistent use of fire revealed an understanding of heat, fuel, timing, and safety, patterns requiring cognitive discipline and group coordination. Tool-making practices also transformed with time. Primitive flakes evolved into specialized blades, scrapers, and points shaped for precise tasks. The famous Acheulean hand axes showed a level of symmetry and standardization that implied communication between individuals, shared learning, and a mental template passed down through generations. The ability to conceptualize a finished shape before striking the first blow was a hallmark of increasingly sophisticated cognitive processing. These tools were more than survival implements. They were markers of neural circuitry growing in complexity. Still, none of this archaeological evidence could reveal why the brain had changed so drastically. That answer only emerged once researchers cracked open the genetic archives hidden inside ancient fossils. Extracting DNA from Neanderthal bones, a process considered impossible decades earlier, allowed scientists to compare genetic signatures across species. When Neanderthal genomes were sequenced, they revealed the presence of ARH-GAP11B, confirming that the mutation existed deep in the shared ancestry of both Neanderthals and modern humans. Its absence in chimpanzees and gorillas marked it as a uniquely human mutation. Geneticists traced additional clues: variations in genes controlling synapse formation, neuron growth, and brain development aligned with the timeline of expanding cranial capacity. This meant that the increasing complexity of ancient tools, shelters, and social networks was not just cultural innovation. It reflected changes in the biological hardware of the brain. Genetics offered the first direct link between the structure of the brain and the behaviors visible in the archaeological record. To understand how these genes functioned, scientists turned to experimental biology. Using stem cells, they grew brain organoids, tiny, simplified models of developing human brain tissue. When ARHGAP11B was introduced into these organoids, the tissues expanded significantly, generating more neural stem cells and forming structures that resembled early cortical folds. This confirmed that the mutation acted as a developmental catalyst, pushing the brain to grow beyond primate norms. Researchers performed similar tests in animal models, inserting the gene into species with smooth brains. The results were dramatic. The animals developed larger cortical regions with emerging folds, patterns associated with higher cognitive processing. While these experiments could not recreate a fully human brain, they demonstrated how a single genetic shift could alter the developmental trajectory of neural tissue. This discovery validated what fossil evidence had hinted at for decades. Something biological was driving the expansion of human cognitive capacity. Once the biological foundation was clear, archaeologists revisited the behavioral timeline with renewed focus. Sites showing early signs of symbolic activity, pigment use, engraved objects, shell beads, aligned with periods when neural connectivity was becoming more efficient. These artifacts marked a pivotal moment when the brain no longer processed information solely for survival, but began representing abstract ideas. Color, shape, and pattern took on meaning. Communities created symbols that conveyed identity, status, or ritual significance. This shift from practical behavior to symbolic behavior reflected a profound change in how early humans perceived the world and each other. Social structures grew more complex as cognitive abilities expanded. Larger groups formed, requiring new levels of cooperation and conflict resolution. Shared tasks, such as hunting, gathering, child-rearing, and protection, depended on communication systems that were becoming increasingly sophisticated. The emergence of early language took root in this setting, supported by neural networks capable of processing grammar, memory, and subtle distinctions in sound. Language, once established, accelerated cultural evolution far faster than genetic evolution ever could. Even the migration patterns preserved in ancient footprints, tool deposits, and pollen samples told stories of changing cognition. Early humans moved strategically across continents, selecting routes based on water availability, prey behavior, and seasonal variation. These migrations were not random wanderings. They were planned journeys, often repeated across generations and refined using shared knowledge. The ability to navigate vast distances required a mental map larger and more detailed than anything seen in other primates. As all these lines of evidence converged, genetic mutations, expanding brain structures, symbolic artifacts, organized shelters, coordinated hunts, a picture emerged of a species undergoing profound cognitive transformation. Evolution had shifted from shaping bones to reshaping minds. The mutation that began as a random duplication became part of a cascading series of changes that altered how humans learned, remembered, imagined, and collaborated. By the time Homo sapiens reached full prominence, humanity had crossed a threshold. The biological foundations for creativity, problem-solving, and symbolic communication were firmly in place. The mind had become a tool capable of building worlds, not just surviving them. Culture evolved faster than biology. Knowledge accumulated across generations, and innovations spread through growing networks of communities. The next chapter explores how these cognitive shifts ignited a burst of creativity and cultural expression that would separate modern humans from every other species that walked the earth. As the human brain continued evolving under the influence of rare genetic changes, its expanding networks gradually reached a point where cognition no longer served only survival. The architecture built over hundreds of thousands of years, enhanced memory, refined motor control, improved social perception, and growing cognitive flexibility, began to unlock abilities that had never existed before on Earth. This shift did not happen suddenly. It emerged through countless interactions between biology, environment, and culture, forming the foundation for creativity, imagination, and symbolic thought. What followed was a profound turning point, the moment when humans stopped merely adapting to the world and began reshaping it. Archaeological records reveal the earliest signs of this transition in the form of pigments, beads, carved objects, and decorated tools. These artifacts were not essential for hunting or shelter, yet they appeared in communities across Africa and Eurasia. Their existence shows that people were no longer focused solely on immediate needs. They were expressing identity, marking belonging, and communicating meaning through symbols. The brain, once guided by raw instinct, had developed the ability to assign ideas to shapes, colors, and patterns. A simple shell bead could represent status, lineage, or memory, concepts that existed only because human minds could imagine them. As imagination strengthened, culture became increasingly dynamic. For the first time, knowledge did not vanish with the death of individuals. It accumulated. Skills and insights were preserved through teaching, ritual, and repetition. Seasonal patterns, animal behavior, and strategies for gathering food became shared knowledge. Communities developed ways to record information in stories, gestures, and markings. Even before written language existed, humans built systems of understanding that allowed them to communicate across generations. Culture evolved faster than genes, driving rapid changes in behavior that left unmistakable signatures in the archaeological record. Hunting strategies grew more sophisticated as communication improved. Instead of relying solely on ambush tactics, groups developed coordinated plans that required understanding terrain, predicting prey movement, and dividing roles strategically. Spears, throwing devices, and long-range projectiles appeared, showing that early humans had begun designing tools that extended their reach beyond the limitations of their bodies. Craftsmanship improved as well. Stone blades became thinner, sharper, and more standardized. These innovations reflected not just technical skill, but the ability to plan multiple steps ahead and visualize a finished tool before shaping it. Social life transformed alongside technology. Larger groups required new methods of cooperation and conflict management. Emotional intelligence deepened, allowing individuals to recognize intentions, anticipate reactions, and navigate complex social hierarchies. Shared rituals strengthened community bonds and offered ways to manage stress during times of scarcity. Burial practices evolved, suggesting that people were thinking about death, memory, and identity in ways that exceeded basic instinct. These behaviors indicate minds capable of forming narratives, stories about the world, about ancestors, and about forces beyond immediate perception. As Homo sapiens expanded across continents, creativity flourished in many forms. Rock shelters became canvases for images of animals, human figures, and abstract shapes. These artworks were not random sketches. They reflect deep understanding of pattern, motion, and symbolism. Some paintings show prey animals depicted with astonishing accuracy, capturing nuances of musculature, posture, and behavior. Others incorporate sequences or repeated shapes that may represent early attempts at recording events or transmitting information. This marks a critical moment in human evolution, the ability to externalize thought, turning internal experiences into physical expressions. The spread of Homo sapiens also intensified interactions with changing environments. Rising sea levels, shifting climate zones, and fluctuating animal populations required constant adaptation. Communities developed new materials for tools, including bone, antler, and ivory, each requiring specialized techniques. Clothing became more fitted and functional, allowing humans to survive in freezing climates that would have been impossible for earlier hominins. The brain's expanded capacity for problem-solving made innovation a survival strategy. People began constructing shelters suited to extreme weather, storing food, and planning seasonal movements long before environmental changes became critical. As creativity expanded, so did the ability to form complex belief systems. The symbolic mind could imagine forces that were invisible, entities that existed beyond the physical world, and connections between natural events and human actions. Rituals emerged that marked transitions, birth, adulthood, death, and created shared meaning within communities. Whether or not early humans understood these systems as religion, they served an evolutionary purpose, strengthening group identity and ensuring cooperation. The cognitive leap from simple tool-maker to meaning-maker fundamentally altered how humans related to one another and to the world around them. The spread of these cultural practices coincided with rapid advances in tool design. Humans began developing composite tools, combining wood, stone, bone, and plant fibers into single functional units. This required long-term planning, experimentation, and shared instruction. Such tools reflect minds capable of breaking complex tasks into smaller parts and recombining them into new solutions. This type of thinking foreshadowed the innovation that would eventually lead to agriculture, architecture, and technology thousands of years later. Genetic studies reveal that populations carried diverse combinations of mutations affecting brain development, including ARH-GAP11B, SRGAP2C, and Notch2NL. These genes did not act alone. Their effects were amplified through cultural innovation, population growth, and intergroup contact. As different communities encountered one another, they exchanged ideas, materials, and techniques. Innovations that originated in one area spread across vast regions, leaving traces that archaeologists now uncover in layered sediments and scattered artifacts. This period, sometimes called the Great Leap Forward, was not a single moment, but a long, gradual acceleration. Human creativity began to influence the direction of evolution itself. Instead of waiting for random mutations to confer new abilities, cultural practices created environments where certain behaviors were rewarded. Groups that communicated effectively survived harsh winters. Those that stored food survived droughts. Those that formed alliances gained protection. Culture became a selective force, shaping how humans lived and thought. By the time agriculture emerged, the human mind had already undergone its most dramatic transformation. The neocortex, once expanded by a single accident of genetics, now supported languages made of thousands of words, intricate social structures, and finely tuned emotional understanding. The mutation that began as an unnoticed duplication had grown into a foundation for storytelling, invention, exploration, and shared identity. The rise of creativity marked a turning point that separated modern humans from every other species. It created a world where ideas could outlive bodies, where knowledge could travel across miles and generations, and where imagination could shape landscapes. The final chapter of this documentary is not just about ancient evolution. It is about the legacy of a mutation that still shapes every decision, invention, and breakthrough made today. Humanity now stands at a moment where it can read, edit, and manipulate the very genes that once reshaped the brain. The next steps may define not only who we are, but who we might become, raising questions that stretch far beyond prehistory and into the future of our species. Don't forget to subscribe. It really supports the channel and helps us bring you more great stories.